Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. This is the first time that we've done a state of the organization talk about the ARRE Foundation, and excited to have folks on with us here, including several of our board members and some members of our research community as well. So we're excited to share this presentation with you. Sarah Scott, our family engagement and education coordinator, would typically do this slide, but she's unavailable today, working with Sam, who's here on the slide, who had an injury this morning. So wishing them well, and hopefully we'll have Sam back on his feet soon. So I'm Amanda Johnson. I will do the bulk of this presentation towards the end, but this is our quick agenda to get started. So Laura Bedmayev, who's our founder and chair, was going to talk about why she started the foundation. Daniel Ordauer, who's another member of our board of directors and our treasurer, is going to talk a little bit about our funding and how we're funded. And then I'm going to talk about our strategies and goals and how you can help. And then we'll leave lots of time for Q&A at the end. So to start, I'm going to pass it over to Laura to talk about why she started the ARRE Foundation.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda. Really appreciate it. Nice to see everyone here today. As Amanda mentioned, I am the founder and chair of the ARRE Foundation. Just want to tell you a little bit about why I started this organization. So my son Alex was born after a full-term uneventful pregnancy. We were in the NICU for weeks without any answers of like why he had these global developmental delays and issues. We spent the following few years trying to figure out what was happening, and eventually he was the first case diagnosed at Boston Children's Hospital. And while we thought this diagnosis of Bourne-Jopas ASXL1 would bring us answers, instead, we plunged into an expansive void that we needed to navigate. And so that lack of information was completely untenable to me. And that's why I started this organization. Next slide. So we have two major stakeholder groups here, our families and the professional community, and bringing those groups together and creating connections. So we've grown the research community from a handful to over 90 people doing all types of groundbreaking work, translating that back into layman's terms, like the Living With guides you may have seen in our resource library. We host webinars and conferences, and working with the families to help you enroll in the research and provide all the education. So that's really where our focus is. Next slide. So why do we work on all of these three related disorders together? The first is strength in numbers. As you all know, these are ultra rare disorders. There's very few cases on a relative basis. So coming together improves our efforts for advocacy, for fundraising. There's also a lot of overlap between the disorders, both from like a scientific research perspective, as well as many of the symptoms and features you can see on this Venn diagram here that was created by one of the family members. And finally, from an efficiency standpoint, there's a lot of infrastructure involved in patient advocacy and research. And so there's tremendous more scale in doing this together across all three disorders. Next slide. So here's our board of directors. Hopefully you see some familiar faces. You should note that all of our board members are family members who have children with ASXL disorders and are very committed to drive this work forward. We're also fortunate to have an amazing medical and scientific advisory board who you may have seen at our conferences and some of the presentations. Two of our members, Natasha and Corey, are also family members who have relatives with these disorders. So they're very personally invested in driving this forward. And we're also fortunate that they can bring all of their medical and scientific knowledge to this space. And finally, our rock star staff, we have, as hopefully many of you have met, Amanda Johnson, our executive director, and one of our more recent additions, Sarah Scott. If you haven't met her, I highly encourage you to reach out. She's our family education and engagement coordinator who will be hosting a lot of the webinars we do, is highly involved in the organization, and is a warm invite into the organization, especially for our newly diagnosed families. and volunteers. So, we are a nonprofit organization. We're always looking for support from anything from small to larger projects. So if you're interested to be involved in any capacity, or you have family or friends that would be interested in supporting this work moving forward, that frees up capacity of our staff. We're always looking for more help. So we love our volunteers. And with that, I'll turn it over to Daniel, our treasurer, who will talk about how we're funded.
Thanks, Laura. Hello, everybody. So we've got the flu going through our household here, so if I need a moment, if I have to mute for a minute to cough, that's why. I apologize. I'm Daniel, and that's a photo of my son, Asher, ASXL1 disorder. We were diagnosed in 2018, so we've been in this community now since the early days of the ARRE Foundation. We'll talk a little bit about how we're funded. So our primary funding sources, we have a budget of about $250,000 a year, and our primary funding sources right now are mostly direct donations from individuals, from folks running independent fundraising events for the foundation. Those are a lot of fun. And the bulk of our funding right now is coming from private foundations and private family foundations with whom we have connections, either personal connections or connections that Amanda has helped us, build up over the years. And then we have other funding sources, including small grants from some other corporate entities. We've received a significant award from PCORI, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, last year to help with our family conference and symposium. And we do receive some U.S. federal funding, some government funding for that same conference via a number of our collaborators. There's some NIH grants that funnel through to us to help provide that funding. So we can take a look at the breakdown of all of this, and you'll see where we are. I think this is a helpful graphic to understand where this is coming from. And there's a sizable chunk, that 17.5% is individual donations, small dollar amounts from families, from folks who are connected to families whose lives our kids have impacted over the last years when people have known them. And then events and these events are really great. They've been really a great source of funding for us. Things from, my wife and I do a movie night every year where we invite neighbors and friends and do a little bit of a pitch for the ARRE Foundation. I know other folks have done these events as well, and they're a lot of fun. And they're a way to get, Amanda and Sarah can help if you have an idea for one. Amanda and Sarah can help pull together information, put together videos for you. It's a great way to really build community in your local area and raise awareness of what's going on in our community. And then you can see the bulk of the money has been coming from foundation grants over the last year. And here's what we're doing with the money that's coming in, right? We have been spending a lot of time in the last few years building our, I'm calling our opportunity funds, while we're developing what we want to do with the money that we have. We have a sizable amount of money in the bank waiting to be deployed, but we're trying to do this in a really strategic manner. We really want to make sure that we are putting our money where we can make the most impact for our families. And this takes a lot of time and energy and research from our part, and building up our community and knowing where our families and where our community wants us to focus our strategic funds. So we've been developing over the last few years, especially since Amanda has come on, we've been developing a family-centered research strategic plan, right? And that is all of the surveys that have gone out, all of the communications that have come from the ARRE Foundation to the families, to find out where our biggest priorities are, what they are, so that we can develop a research plan, because we can't fund everything right now, right? We would love to have millions of dollars available to us, but we don't. We're a small advocacy organization, and we really have to be targeted about what we're doing. So we have to understand what's most important to our community to fund first, what that research is. And we have to, at the same time, be building a fundraising capacity for long-term sustainability, right? We have to keep this momentum going. Once we get going, if we have to stop because funds dry up or we're not planning ahead long enough, we lose a lot of momentum and we lose a lot of engagement, and scientists will go on to other things where there is money. So we want to make sure that we are building up a process behind us as we're doing this to keep momentum going. And, you know, the last thing, and we've got some slides, and I know Amanda will talk about it, is just the size of our research network and building that. We started with 5 grants and a really small group of research network, and it has grown substantially over the last 5 years. So we have been really focused on building that community of researchers and people who are interested in the ASXL genes and doing the research so that we can continue to help fund them and give them grants that will spur their desire to keep doing the research. And we're also making investments in hiring, in staff. And a lot of times this is, you know, hard to balance staff out with the, you know, balance the money that we're spending on staff with the research that we're doing. But we all know on the family side that we often have to stop doing the work that we're doing, either because our jobs pull us away or because we end up in the hospital for weeks on end. And we really are committed to keeping this foundation going for everybody and keep that continuity and keeping that momentum going. And that's why we've invested in staff to make sure that, you know, there's those of us who are on the board and all of our volunteers are great. We love us all, but there are times when we just can't move something forward because there's plenty going on in our lives. And we turn to Amanda and Sarah at this point and say, we need to keep this momentum going. So that's why we are hiring people to actually do the work for us and keep this going, keep our foot on the gas pedal, as it says here. And then it's been great to see the relationships in the research community and other funders and other organizations, other patient advocacy groups that we've been connected to and learn from them and see what they've done over the years. So that's the other piece of where we're spending our money, is to really build up that infrastructure so we can just keep moving forward and keep the momentum up. And a little bit of where we've been over the last, I guess it's 6 years now, right? You know, the photo up in the top left was a great photo from our conference last year, and there's always a comparison with the 2019 family conference, and you see the growth of the family and the research network all at once, and it's been amazing. We've also been able to connect with folks like Natasha, and we've been building up a natural history study, and for all the ASXL-related disorders, we've been giving money out for basic science grants. It's really, and the resource directory, and I know Amanda will be talking about a lot more of this as we talk about 2025 and onward. So I'll pass it over to you, Amanda.
Great. Thanks, Daniel. So I'm Amanda Johnson. I'm the executive director of the ARRE Foundation. I've been with the organization since January of 2021. And I think part of my story and how I got here relates to sort of what Daniel just shared. You know, when Laura started the organization, it was entirely volunteer run up through 2020 when COVID hit. And I think the capacity that the volunteers had was the little bit of capacity was taken away by all the complications that COVID and life in a pandemic brought with it. And Laura and the board made the decision to hire somebody. So that's how I came into the picture. So I have children. I do not have a child with an ASXL-related disorder, but I bring to the organization a career working in really small nonprofit organizations. So building things and structures and relationships is something that I've been doing my whole career, including working with another rare disease organization and other sort of larger research infrastructure organizations as well. And it's just been a true privilege to be a part of this community for the last 4 years and get to know many of the families who are part of this community, members of the research network, many of whom I consider excellent friends now. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about our strategy as an organization, both at a higher level, where we're going, and talk a little bit about where we are now and what our nearer term goals are for 2025. So I am going to talk a lot about research, and I want to make sure that we start with some definitions just to sort of level set and make sure that the terms that I'm using will help make sense in the subsequent slides here. So I'm going to describe two different types of research that we're going to be talking about. So the first is clinical research. So this is types of research that involve people. So it may be testing treatments or therapies or ways to improve care. And really the goal of this clinical research is to help find better options for managing or treating a disease. So that's clinical research. And then there's basic science research. This is research that's done in a laboratory using cells and microscopes and really fancy technology to help figure out the fundamental biology of a disease. And so this is the research that helps answer really basic scientific questions that can help unlock answers to how we look for treatments in the future. So the ARRE Foundation funds both clinical research and basic science research. And when we ask families to participate in research, we're typically asking them to participate in clinical research. So hopefully that's a little bit of background for the next couple of slides here. So this is a really complex slide. You don't have to understand really any of it other than to just sort of think about this as a journey. So along the top, you can see in the blue shapes sort of an overview of what the drug development process looks like, starting with drug discovery, so understanding the biology, and from that understanding, working on a treatment strategy to start working on the actual process of developing a drug and all of what's called preclinical work that goes into that process. So that's things like having model systems to test treatments in, whether those are animal models or cell models. That's things like natural history study, understanding what these disorders look like over time. What's the trajectory of someone's life? What is typical for someone who has an ASXL-related disorder? And then moving into drug approval. And that is a more sort of technical and bureaucratic part of this process that includes regulators like the FDA here in the US and running clinical trials and ultimately, hopefully on the path to having a drug that is safe and works for these disorders. So that's sort of this long-term path that we and many of our other rare disease patient advocacy groups are on. And then I wanted to share sort of where we are as an organization. And so our strategy is really a parallel path. So trying to do two things at once. One is a little bit easier than the other. So the first there is supporting and engaging families. So this is things like developing educational resources for families, building our community. Where are people? How can we get in contact with them when there are research opportunities to participate in? Understanding what the needs and priorities of families are. Daniel talked about building our research roadmap and making sure it's family-centered. That's been a big part of this work. And then actually engaging families in these research opportunities as we develop them, because we can't do clinical research in ASXL-related disorders without information from families. Families hold so much information from your lived experience, from what you know about your children, from their own medical history and the things that are more formally documented, you know, with the doctors and therapists that they see. But we have to get that information you know, out of a medical record, out of the great discussions that happen in the Facebook community, and bring that into a formal research infrastructure so that it can be published and accessed by other doctors, by pharmaceutical industry people who may have, you know, interest in these disorders and are trying to figure out if it's a worthwhile investment to work with us. So that's a big part of that sort of supporting and engaging families piece. That is all relatively easy and relatively inexpensive. We've made a lot of great strides with this. It's one of the reasons that we hired Sarah in September, is to help keep working on what can we develop for families that's helpful now while we keep working on the second part of this path, which is catalyzing and driving research. And this is where we have a long way to go. So we really still don't understand a lot about the ASXL genes, and I'll talk about this in another slide in a moment here, but there's a lot of basic discovery that still needs to be done about these genes and how they work, what they control, and that is critical to understanding a therapeutic pathway. What could we potentially target with a drug or a gene therapy or another approach to help make a change or make an improvement in the quality of life of individuals with ASXL-related disorders. Additionally, developing these preclinical tools that anybody in the research community could use. So this is sort of part of, we talk about like setting the table. What can we bring to the table? What can we help develop? What can we catalyze? What can we help create or incentivize to help bring more of these tools. And there are many, many tools that we need, as I mentioned, animal models, cell models, different access to data sets, all this sort of stuff. How can we help bring that to the table in a way that's available to any researcher around the world to help make progress on this really long path? And then also preparing for clinical trials. So Natasha and Dr. Bianca Russell, who's also on our medical and scientific advisory board, they gave a great presentation at our conference in 2024 on the subject. If this is interesting to you, I encourage you to watch the recording. It's also in our resource library. These are all the different things that we need to do from a clinical perspective to be ready for clinical trials. So that's including understanding what the natural history of these disorders look like. What are the features? What are the most common features? What's most important to families that if we had a treatment or a therapy that would be most important to measure change and prove to a regulator that this therapy is effective? So all of that is part of clinical trial readiness, but that work is also really important to families and significant for the now, because that work also supports improvements to care. As we learn this information, publish it, it becomes more available to doctors and their care teams around the world. And that's the sort of information that we can be working on now, publishing now, to help make improvements to care sooner while we continue to work on this longer term process for pursuing drugs and treatments for ASXL-related disorders. So where are we now and where are we going? So my undergraduate degree is in organizational communication, and I love a good SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So I'm going to present this in the context of a SWOT analysis here. So we'll start with strengths and go through the other four. So sort of where are we now with our strengths? We have a really highly engaged community, which is wonderful. That includes both the family community and the research community. And I know we have a lot of families on with us today, and just want to emphasize how special it is that we have such a collaborative community that's willing to work together, to share resources, to share information, and to share that information freely. So we're really fortunate to have that really collaborative group of researchers working with us. We have financial stability as an organization, as Daniel mentioned, making sure that we have a solid foundation of support to help make sure that we can be sustainable into the future is something that we've put a lot of time and effort into, making sure that we don't flare out, right? We want to make sure that we're in this for the long haul to see us through that entire process that I talked about earlier. And we have a really strong foundation for clinical research. So that's been sort of an area of emphasis for us for the last couple of years, building the infrastructure of the ASXL-related disorders natural history study, which was formerly called the registry. So it's a new name, same study, as it continues to get more robust. Adding a new study, which I'll talk about a little bit later, called the ALPS study, and I'll explain what that acronym means. And all of that is ready to grow. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, that both supports clinical care now and prepares us for future clinical trials. So our weaknesses, we still have really significant gaps that limit drug discovery. Understanding the complex biology and function of these genes is a critical part to being able to understand and target a therapeutic strategy. And at this time, there is no peer-reviewed evidence that indicates there's a safe or effective treatment strategy for any ASXL-related disorder. So this is a big gap that we're working to try to fill. And our research toolbox is incomplete. This is some of that preclinical stuff that I talked about earlier. We're missing key resources that are a part of this toolbox to enable the drug discovery and therapeutic development process. We also still have some gaps in our strategic scientific leadership that will help us make good, smart decisions as an organization. There's way more to do than we have capacity to do, either from a sort of time perspective or a financial resource perspective. So every decision that we make has to be really carefully prioritized. And we're continuing to look for scientific advising and support who can sit on our side of the table with our goals in mind and help us make these strategic decisions that are in the best interests of families in our community. So opportunities we are seeing across the board, and this doesn't impact just our genetic community, but many other rare diseases as well, better access to genetic testing. So we're able to get help to families sooner as kids, really young kids, including even babies, are getting diagnosed much, much quicker with access to the type of genetic testing that they need. And that's driving a lot of growth in our community. We're also seeing not just younger kids coming into our community, but older adults too, who have not had access to the genetic testing that they need to get a conclusive diagnosis. So that's actually helping us sort of fill out that natural history piece, right? We know more individuals in our family who are younger and more who are older, and we can help understand the spectrum of these disorders over time. And then we also have these new and ongoing clinical research studies that are designed around the family priorities. And that goes back to the natural history study at UCLA with Dr. Russell, and then Dr. Ludwig's ALPS study as well. Those both continue to grow and expand. And then sort of where we're going, what threats are we sort of facing as an organization? There's tremendous uncertainty right now in the US with some of the changes from the new administration. A lot of the researchers who are part of our research network work in labs that are primarily funded through government funding sources, including the NIH and the FDA. So while there's not a lot of ASXL specific research that's funded through federally funded sources in the US, a lot of the work where our work is happening that maybe we fund or they get through other private funding is happening in labs that are primarily supported by government funding. So that is a threat to those labs if they can't keep the rest of their funding to keep their equipment, to keep their research teams and their trainees. That's something that we're watching really carefully. The PCORI award that we have currently, and we're hoping to have another one in the future, that is an entity that's also funded by Congress, and we don't know if that funding is potentially under threat as well. So that's something we're watching really carefully, and it's changing all the time. It's hard to sort of keep tabs on where things are and how much of a concern that we should have, but it's something that we're watching really carefully, as are many other organizations working in the healthcare and research space. And then we're also always concerned about family research fatigue. We understand, led by parents of kids with ASXL-related disorders, how much families are juggling and how much we're asking families to do on top of care responsibilities and regular life and day jobs, and want to make sure that we're being really mindful about how we're asking families to engage in research and being mindful of potential fatigue. So now we're going to look ahead, sort of what are our goals for 2025, the current year we're in now. So we have sort of 4 primary goals for the year. First is strengthening our communications. Second, continuing to build our scientific leadership. We have some specific investments in research we're planning, and then planning to launch the ASXL census very soon to try to help understand the size of our community. So I'll talk about each of these here briefly now. So strengthening our communications, very excited to share we have a new website that is planned to launch in May of 2025. We have been working with a website that we've had for several years that has just, as we've added more and more to it, it's gotten increasingly difficult to navigate. So this is a new website that will help accommodate all these additional new educational resources that we're providing for families. It will have a new section that's dedicated to the professional community. So if there's a doctor who has a new patient and they need information about ASXL-related disorders, there will be a home for them on the new version of our website, in addition to helping to share what is in that research toolbox for the basic science community, what collaborations are possible, what tools exist. So that's a whole new section of this new site that I personally am really excited about. And we're working sort of on the technical pieces behind the scenes to help families find us faster. So making sure that this new site is really optimized for search engine optimization. So when someone gets a diagnosis and they go to a search engine and look up their child's disorder or their gene, they can find us and the resources that we have for families right away. That's a big priority. That's a part of this new website. And also have an emphasis in this year in sharing what we're doing and why. There's so much happening all the time. And one of my principal challenges is making sure that we're communicating that with the family community. A lot of it's really complex, a lot of it's slow, and it's hard to communicate that in a way that is succinct and I think makes sense to people. So that's something that we're working on this year, is not only what we're doing it, but why we're doing it and where things stand. So this event today is part of the implementation of that strategy and bringing this to the family community and our research community as well. And really, this is a really long road, and we want to make sure we're bringing everybody in our community sort of on this journey with us. And I think in addition to sharing our wins, what's working well, we also want to be able to be honest and open about asking for help with our challenges and using this tremendous community that we have to help source resources to help solve those challenges. And then additionally, stronger engagement with families. That's really what Sarah has been working on as she's come on board with us. She's meeting one-on-one with families. I think she's met with, gosh, maybe 30 families one-on-one at this point. And the insights that she has uncovered in these short meetings has been really tremendous. And this is going to be a big part of how we continue to build our communications messaging and different resources that we're developing based on these learnings. And really, it's all centered around what do families need, both in terms of resources and information. How do we reach you? What's the best time to reach you? All that sort of stuff is stuff that Sarah is working on. And then additionally, building our scientific leadership. We are continuing to hire for a senior scientific leadership role, and that's really somebody who can advocate for the ARRE Foundation's goals and priorities, understand what we're trying to achieve as an organization from a strategic perspective and help us work towards those goals, and really be a steward of our scientific investments. Someone who understands enough of the science that they can help make sure that the grants that we're giving out are meeting their objectives, helping to ask questions of the researchers that we're funding that help make sure that the work that we're putting money out there to help support is actually meeting its objectives. So that's something that we're looking for now. That position is available on our website, and we can share it with everybody and follow up to this call if you know of anybody who might be interested in this role. And then just continuing to expand the expertise of our volunteer advisors. So looking to fill some additional gaps on a volunteer perspective from people who have experience with drug development and clinical trial readiness and other parts of our path that we could use some additional outside guidance and support on as we continue to evaluate options and make decisions as we go. And then we do have some exciting investments in research that we're making this year. So the first is a drug repurposing screen in fruit flies. So this is something that we've watched several other patient advocacy organizations do, and think it's a good risk reward benefit for the organization to try a project like this and see if we can find a approved drug or compound that's already out there that could potentially help. So the way that this works is we work with an academic researcher who specializes in fruit flies. They develop a fruit fly that is similar, is genetically similar to have an ASXL mutation, and then they test thousands of different approved drugs on these flies, and they look for changes in the fly's behavior. They look to see if the flies look different after they ingest these compounds, and that is sort of an early sign that maybe we found something that could potentially be helpful. It's just a first step. There's lots of additional validation testing that needs to be done after that before we would move anything forward to come to a human being. But we've seen some organizations that have done this in the rare community that have found things as simple as over-the-counter medicines that might have an impact. So things that we know are safe, they're easy to access, they're very well studied. And so this is sort of a fishing expedition, but it's something that we think is worthwhile to see if we can try to generate some additional leads and hypotheses and potentially find something that's already out there that could have a positive impact on individuals with these disorders while we continue to look for a longer term therapeutic mechanism. We're also planning to make $300,000 investments in basic science grants. So these will be like an open call to the research community to submit proposals that are responsive to our research priorities, which are tied to getting closer to treatment. So understanding more of that basic biology. So this is, we don't have exact timing for this yet in terms of when this call for proposals will go out, but that's planned for this year. And then we do have 2 additional clinical research investments. The first one is already underway. This is we actually haven't announced it yet broadly outside of sort of sharing that this was going to happen, but we are awarding a 3-year, $180,000 grant to Dr. Bianca Russell at UCLA to support the ASXL-related disorders natural history study and the infrastructure that keeps that study going. So we're really pleased that we can provide her some continuity and sustainability, knowing that we'll be able to make a 3-year investment, which allows her to plan over 3 years and just really helps from a sustainability and continuity perspective. And then we're also, we will have an RFA, a request for applications, for a 2-year award to support the expansion of more collaborative clinical data collection, including through the natural history study. That will be a 2-year award totaling $150,000. And then we are planning to launch the ASXL census on Rare Disease Day, which is at the end of this month on February 28th. And this census really seeks to answer the question, how many people have ASXL-related disorders? And I think this is a question that a lot of families are curious about. But in addition to that, there's also a strategic reason for us to do this. And that is we want to be able to show our strength in our numbers. So with more solid data around how many people have been diagnosed, that helps strengthen our case for the size of our community for investment from the pharmaceutical industry, leveraging additional funding, and then additional research opportunities as well. The other strategic reason is it helps us be in contact with more families and provide them, when they take the census, provide them with the optional opportunity to continue to stay in touch with us to learn more about how they can continue to contribute to research. So this is another piece of that engagement puzzle. So you can look for this at the end of this month. The goal is to make this as easy for families to complete as possible and help make sure that the individuals in your family who have an ASXL diagnosis are getting counted and help make sure that their story is part of this larger effort to continue to make progress in this community. So a few other things before we start to wrap up here. So we have our research collaborators, some of whom are on the call with us today, have been very busy analyzing a lot of the data that was collected at the 2024 conference in Baltimore. That includes the focus groups that we had there and lots of data that was collected through the ALPS study, which is the ASXL behavioral phenotyping study that's run by Dr. Natasha Ledwig, who's also part of our medical and scientific advisory board. And she has a brother with ASXL3 related disorder, Bainbridge-Roper syndrome. She is driving this first of its kind study in ASXL-related disorders. And this is all part of helping to describe what are the neurodevelopmental features of these conditions and what measures could we use to change or to help, what outcome measures could we use to help figure out if there's change over time in a clinical trial. So this is all part of this sort of really foundational work, both to better describe these disorders and to work towards clinical trial readiness. So phases 1 and 2 for ALPS happened at our conference and immediately after for the people who were able to be there in person and participated in in-person assessments from a team of neuropsychologists. Phase 3 is getting ready to launch later this spring, and this is the phase that will be open to anybody worldwide. So this is a series of online questionnaires that help to describe more broadly that behavioral phenotype. What are the features of neurodevelopment and behavior that are part of these conditions? So I encourage you to keep an eye out for that and encourage very strong participation in that study. And then we're also working on launching our research question prioritization survey. This is part of our PCORI award that we have from last year. And really, we're seeking to answer the question, what are the most pressing research questions to answer through research studies? And that will be open to anybody who's connected to our community. So certainly parents and caregivers, but also if your loved one has therapists or other members of their care team, they're welcome to take it. The research community is welcome to take it. So really, it's open to anybody to help gather a really wide perspective on what are the most pressing research questions. And then how can you help? So we've seen what our strengths and opportunities are, where we have gaps that we need to fill. So if you're interested and able to help with this, there's certainly some concrete things that I can suggest that you might consider taking action on and being a part of. The first is connections and fundraising. As Daniel mentioned, a lot of our funding right now is coming from private philanthropy. Those are all connections that our family community has helped us make. So if there's someone in your community who you think would be interested in helping to move this work forward, I would love to work with you to learn a little bit more about them and how to bring those people into this work and be a part of our vision for the future. And then additionally, we're looking for additional connections to scientific and medical expertise. So not just the funding side, but the research side as well. As Daniel mentioned, hosting fundraising events is a huge part of how we are gathering lots of grassroots fundraising to drive this work forward. And we have the infrastructure to support you. We have online giving forms. I can work with you on sponsorships, media pitching, anything that you need. We have the tools to help you run a great, fun fundraising event. Everything from the movie night that Daniel mentioned to the winter ball that Laura hosts here in Maine that engages sort of the preschool family community and lots of local sponsors for sort of a princess themed fundraiser. There's really no limit to what what you could turn into a fundraiser, and we're here to help you do that. There's also lots of opportunities for direct action. Help us get to know you and your family. Please meet with Sarah Scott. I will share as we move into Q&A a link where you can make an appointment to meet with her. She just asks questions sort of about your journey and your family, what your priorities are, how we can help you from an informational perspective. It's really been very helpful to us to really have some of these one-on-one conversations with more members of our community as we continue to help make sure that we're responsive to families and their needs. Strongly encourage you to enroll in the ASXL-related disorders natural history study. I will also put information in a link in the chat to how to do that. There's an online initial sort of intake enrollment survey that you can take that sort of initiates that process, where you can reach out to the research team at UCLA if you have additional questions. You will need your genetic report to start that process. So if you don't have your hands on that now, that would be something you could start working on while you sort of initiate this process. And we are working really hard to sort of simplify the process of participating in research for families. So if you're interested in participating in ALPS Part 3, enrolling in the natural history study is the first step of that, because that study is actually the ALPS study is actually part of the natural history study. So you only have to consent to one study and you have access to all these different components. So I encourage you to consider that if you're not already enrolled. And then lastly, really just staying tuned in for when the ARRE Foundation calls for action. We will not ask you to do something if we don't think it's a significant and important thing to do to help advance our strategic objectives. So we understand that families are really busy, don't have a lot of additional time and capacity. So if we make an ask, it's because we think it's really important. So you can watch for those calls in our newsletter, on social media, on our website. We also will share some of that information in the family Facebook groups if you're active there. There's lots of different ways to kind of stay tuned in, or you can always ask me, or you can ask Sarah. We're here to help get you connected to those opportunities. And finally, we know that every family can't do it all. But if we can get every family in our community doing what they can, that sort of collective action is what really helps move the needle collectively as a community. And that's really what we're trying to build, is a community that works together to help move all of this forward. So I will end with a save the date. So this is a picture of the family community at our 2024 ASXL Family Conference that was in Baltimore this year, or last year in July. So we do the family conference every other year. So the next family conference will be in 2026. We are aiming for late June in Ann Arbor, Michigan, in association with the University of Michigan. That is not confirmed, but if you want to sort of pencil in a date towards the end of June 2026 for the family conference, that's something to be looking forward to and planning for your family if you're interested in attending. And then we do host the research symposium on an annual basis. So our research symposium will be this fall in Boston towards the end of October. So that's what we have, and we're happy to stop here and take questions. So you're welcome to put a question in the chat, or you can come off mute and ask directly. And I know we have several of our board members here, and so I may ask for some of their help too in answering some of these questions as well. Any questions, comments, ideas? Laura or Daniel or any board members, do you have any other additions you'd like to make to what we just heard?
I mean, I think you covered it very well, Amanda. I would just, encourage everyone to participate in all of the upcoming things like the census, to check out the resource library. And I know we have a lot of folks on the call who are champions. So for those people who did not join us today, if you can go back to your communities, encourage them to watch this recording, sharing the information, encouraging people to get involved with fundraising, with volunteering, to connect with Sarah, that would be really meaningful. So thank you all too for being here today.
I just wanted to jump in quickly. I do have an idea for fundraising that I think could, that's my background, marketing and fundraising. Well, fundraising's like newish, but I've always been in marketing and advertising. So one of the things that I've found through the years is fundraising is overwhelming for a lot of people. People that don't have experience in it don't really know how to do it, let alone start it. So there's a lot of organizations that do, like national fundraisers. So partnering with like a popcorn company, there's a ton of them. So I could reach out to one of them and create something that would be like kind of turnkey for anyone that wanted to participate across the US. So that's my thought.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
I'll take that on.
Yeah,
I'll reach out to a few places and see what's easy. A lot of companies, we just did one with the Eagles Autism Foundation for Little Caesars Pizza. And it was just pizza kits, but they had a whole toolkit that made it really easy for people to launch that themselves. So I'll look into a few of those and reach out to everyone.
That's great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a question in the chat from Aviv. He says, assuming money is not an issue and we fast forward 10 or 20 years, can we be optimistic about a drug to treat or fix ASXL in 10 to 20 years? I do think that's something we can be optimistic about on that timeline. There's a lot of work that needs to happen to get there, but I think that's a timeline that is potentially doable. Other questions?
I just wanted to hop on and say hi to everybody real quick. I'm sorry I wasn't able to be there for the whole call. This is Sarah, the Family Engagement and Education Coordinator. I don't know if Amanda shared, but my son thankfully did not break his foot, but I thought maybe he did. So I had to rush him to the orthopedic immediate care this morning, which I'm sure all of you parents completely understand. But I just wanted to reiterate, I would absolutely love to chat with any families who are on this call or who listen to this recording. I know Amanda said she was going to put my email or my link to my calendar, but I want to say, it has been such a privilege to speak to the families who I already have, and I cannot wait to hear from you. I want to hear your story and your thoughts and what your priorities are. I want to hear the heartbeat of our family so that the ARRE Foundation can support you through information and education and the resources that we can, and just to get to know you. So just wanted to give that shout out on my drive home. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm glad to hear Sammy's okay. Oh. Another really good question. Where did I get my water bottle sticker? Oh, I can show off all my stickers. I have my ARRE Foundation sticker, my ALP study sticker. I have the natural history study. This one's harder to see, but that's up here. So I have a whole bunch of these in my desk. So if you write me an email, I'll mail you one.
But if there's more t-shirts or anything like that, I'd love to get some t-shirts or anything that has something on it to help drive some conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a bonfire shop. If you go to our website, there's a little shop tab at the top. You can access a bunch of our materials there. And then we do a t-shirt fundraiser for Bainbridge-Roper Syndrome Awareness Day and for Shashipania Syndrome Awareness Day. And then the Boring Opitz Syndrome Foundation, actually, I think they launched it yesterday. They do a t-shirt fundraiser for the Boring Opitz community as well.
All right, I'll look into that. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any questions before we wrap up here? Great. Well, thanks everybody for joining. It's wonderful to be able to do this, to have progress to share, and thank everybody for their contributions in making this happen. And please take Sarah and I up on our offers to connect with you. It's what keeps all of this moving forward. So thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.